Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to welcome you to NPD's NBDA cycling webinar for May 2020. In this webinar today, we're going to be going through quite a few different topics and hope you find this interesting. I'll go through an agenda on the next, here we go. The agenda for our webinar today, we will be spending a little bit of time going over the retail landscape, both at a more holistic general level, as well as the cycling retail landscape. We're going to spend a decent amount of time talking about COVID-19 and sort of the impacts there that are changing the retail landscape. We will look at our month-end March sales results, and also speak a little bit about key opportunities as it pertains to the season and specifically COVID-19. I'd like to take just a minute to introduce both myself and my colleague. My name is John Graff. I work out of NPD's Boulder office, and I am your point of contact as it pertains to service needs. I am your account manager, and then my colleague Dirk Sorensen is also on the call. He is our executive director and also our sports industry analyst working in the Boulder office as well. And Dirk, I'm going to let you take away, and I am going to be sort of moderating in the background. I'll ping questions if I have them sort of on behalf of our retailers, and let's get started.
Sounds wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to invite me to do this. I'm going to actually back up a slide and really ask all of you that do attend and listen in on this webinar to feel free to reach out to myself or John and Dirk. My email is dirk.sorensen@npd.com, and John is listed here at john.graff@npd.com. We've also included our LinkedIn profiles. I find it really helpful to follow NPD staff and employees, including John and myself, for relevant and up-to-date content as we kind of come across it as it impacts the bike industry. About a week ago, as a matter of fact, I wrote a blog about what we're seeing in March, and that is available on LinkedIn for you to read. So let's dive in here and start talking about what we're seeing generally in the retail landscape. And, to preface these things, I'm fully aware, as almost everyone is right now, that we're all very much impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. Retail landscape has dramatically changed in just a few months. And much of the initial conversation that we're going to have today is going to feel very dated, but I think it's important to take a little bit of time to reflect on the past year so that we can really look at the impacts of what we're seeing with the crisis today as a complication and a challenge for us as retailers in the marketplace in the cycling industry, and then really point to some key opportunities moving into the future. So the industry, the total market right now, you can really see that consumer electronics, small appliances, housewares have all really thrived over the last 12 months. Those categories towards the bottom, footwear, apparel, prestige, beauty, and accessories, have really been, they were already tracking negatively through March, but the impacts of COVID have just accelerated flat to declining sales. And we're going to touch into that a little bit more. So NPD as a group has access to $2.1 trillion of receipts that we look at largely across discretionary categories that are discretionary spend categories in the United States. So we have a pretty broad landscape to look at what's happening at retail today. So diving into sports as it pertains to our categories and our industries, I think this is a really great look at the industry. This is POS data, point of sales data. The numbers you see here reflect billions of dollars in sales over the last 12 months. And what you can see here is that, with the 12 months total, activewear was down 2%. Athletic footwear was down 1%. Sports equipment in the outdoors was flat. Team sports equipment was actually up 5%, really largely based on some 2019 growth in categories like golf. Cycling has actually been up 6%, and so sports equipment was down 1%. Finally, health and fitness equipment is up 15%. So this is a 12-month window that does include the month of March that did have the coronavirus impact. So you can really imagine that what was going on was it was a pretty healthy retail economy for sports prior to COVID. And we're going to get into the impacts of COVID here in a moment. Looking again back at that 12-month window, some key growing categories worth mentioning for us to really think about in the cycling space were things like electric bikes. First to kind of really visualize here on the top 20 categories over the last 12 months were things like front suspension bicycles, helmets grew, and cyclocross gravel bikes did quite well. Also, you'll notice another theme here that is really worth mentioning, which is this health at home. So prior to March of this year, treadmills, dumbbells, rowing machines, these types of items weren't even on this list. The amount of interest by consumers when COVID hit in these categories is really astounding. And again, we are going to be talking about that here in a few moments. So the bottom 20 categories, what you'll see here is that within sports, in the sports space, the categories that have had the steepest declines are at, basically in the apparel and footwear space. T-shirts are way down, casual pants are down, active T-shirts are down, leggings are down, you name it. So if it's footwear or athletic apparel or active apparel, we really saw these categories starting to become challenged, and then the accelerant really has been COVID. Top growing brands here. This is a great quick snapshot. I think it's very interesting to see Specialized and Schwinn here about middle third up in this list. Again, largely on the growth of just March sale. Specialty channel performance. So it's really good. We just had this kind of total industry look. And now what we're seeing here is the growth within the specialty retail base. And you can see that bike specialty did quite well, while outdoor specialty and snow specialty have been struggling a little bit in the last 12 months. And I think this is a really good moment to talk about why is this. If you look at these specialty channels, 2 of the 3 of these channels were closed in March pretty quickly due to coronavirus. Bike specialty managed to stay open, or many retailers stayed open because they were deemed essential services by their states. So a really kind of impactful moment for specialty retailers, just called out here in this single slide. So let's talk about what we saw over the last 12 months in cycling. As a total market overview, not just IBD, cycling market is about a $5.9 billion business. It grew 8% in the last 12 months. Bikes showed the greatest growth, and it was up about 10%, and services declined 2%. And as we get into the IBD data in a moment, what you're going to notice is almost all of those services declined outside of the independent bicycle dealer channel. So a couple mass or large format sporting goods retailers did offer services. Those large format retailers did close in March, so I do think that had some contributing effect to this annualized number. Looking at the IBD, or the independent bicycle dealers, you can see that the IBD is a $3.3 billion channel for cycling. It grew 6% in the last 12 months, and sales of bicycles are up 9%. So the dollar change on the right represents the annual dollar change that we recognize. So $163 million in bike sales were added year over year to the IBD channel. All other categories did grow. So a very positive kind of market condition through March for the IBD dealer base. In terms of bikes, yes.
on this. When you compare shop services in the IBD versus total market,
Right.
Can you comment on that at all?
Well, what do you mean, John?
I'm just curious about whether or not what shop services we're doing inside of the IBD relative to the rest of the market. Was it a steeper level of growth, and did that really show up more with March data and with the onset of COVID?
Well, there was a little bit of an offset, and we'll get into that in a moment, around shop services in the IBD. So we roll up both services as well, like repair services, as well as rentals in this shop services category. Rentals were off, I believe, about $46 million just due to coronavirus. So a really pretty healthy chunk came out in just March, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And John, one thing that we can do for our dealers is, if you have further questions on this, shoot them to John, and we can certainly clarify these questions for you.
Yep.
So in terms of the independent bicycle dealers, bikes represented about 2/3 of the total sales in the IBD. The road category, really complemented by strong gravel sales, grew 4%. And overall, seeing the road category grow that level is really, really astonishing. It's the first time in the 4 years that I've been tracking and working with NPD retail data where I've seen road actually grow in the last 12 months. Key other categories worth mentioning: $71 million of growth in the e-bike category, or up 48%, and mountain bikes were up $55 million, or 3%.
Dirk, I've got a question there too. When you're talking about road growth and what's so sort of unusual about that, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is that related to certain price bands or brands, or I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, I think all in all, what we're seeing here is kind of two effects that are helping the road category grow, or had helped the road category grow over the last 12 months. The first element is that gravel bikes are included in that road number, and there's a real surge in that the demand for gravel bicycles. And the second is there also seems to be no reticence by both manufacturers and consumers at pushing those price bands up on high-performance road bikes. So what we're seeing is that the average selling prices continue to increase in this category for those kind of high vector or high-end bicycles. And those consumers that demand or desire those bicycles seem to be showing no kind of reluctance to pay a premium for high-end bikes that like maybe are Di2 equipped or ETAP equipped types of bicycles. So that, I believe, is really what's kind of contributing to that growth. But if I were really to dive into that data, 99% of this is really the emergence of that gravel category.
Interesting.
So in terms of
what about e-bikes, Dirk? I mean, we've obviously seen such a surge in the e-bike category for quite some time now. I'd be interested to hear what you're seeing there.
Sure. I mean, the big growth driver in 2019, 2020, that we'll tap into a little bit later in this conversation has really been the emergence of e-bikes that really have price bands about $5,000 or more. And those bikes are all really kind of specialty designs, right? Like e-mountain bikes, e-road bikes. Those are the bikes that seem to be really gaining a lot of share. Now, that might be an aberration as the market kind of develops around e-bike. But what we continue to see year in and year out is about a $70 to $90 million gain in that category for the independent bicycle dealer. So a really, really strong and thriving category. The second thing I would mention is that when you look at our distribution data, we have a measure that we have within our data sets. It lets us know how widely available a product is. say 3-4 years ago, maybe 40, 50, 60% of retailers reported carrying an e-bike. At this point, e-bike distribution rivals mountain and road. So it's a pretty complete, adoption across the independent bicycle dealer.
And isn't it, if I remember correctly, I believe that we've just recently added a new way to cut the data in e-bikes, to your point about e-mountain bikes and e-road bikes, to where we've now got an attribute for bike type that can further segment that data. Is that right? That's
correct. So,
excellent.
Again, that's something that our retailers that are reporting into our panel have availability to, and something that I believe that, our account managers can assist retailers with.
Yep.
So moving on to accessories, and I want to be mindful a little bit of time, so we're going to kind of make sure that we're hitting the high points here. Accessories were about a $306 million business, flat to last year. I think the key story here is that repair and maintenance really grew, about $3 million. The other big grower is trainers and rollers, and this is going to be a key theme as we get through towards the end of the deck. So let's go ahead and we're going to hold our discussion about trainers, rollers, and the opportunity for health and fitness at home for a little bit of a later conversation. Parts overview. A reversal of trend here. Parts were up 1% to $29 million category, excuse me. It's important to note the tires and tubes actually increased $8 million year over year. That's a 5% increase. And why that's important is about a year ago when we were reviewing this data, we were seeing an actual declination in tire and tube sales. And a lot of people were attributing that to, less interest in cycling and riding. Now what I think we're seeing is, now people are on new bikes with new tire sizes, primarily width, not wheel size. And now they're starting to erode those tires and need replacement. So I think the mileage question that was being brought up around tires and tubes about a year ago probably was just kind of a false negative about where the market was going. And again, when we look at, I think the impacts of COVID, I think that the future is pretty bright for cycling. The other thing I'll point out here, well, let me go to the next slide. The other thing I'd point out here is, over the last 12 months, we saw all helmet, shoe, and gloves categories grow. Helmets were particularly strong, growing 10% to $123 million category for the IBD. So moving on, really getting to the heart of the matter, while it's interesting to look at the 12 months in review, the impacts of the COVID retail crisis are really, really dramatic, and I really want to spend the remainder of our time talking about both the complications and challenges that have emerged because of the crisis, as well as some opportunities I think that are available for the IBD. So one of the things that NPD likes to think about is where are we at in this phases of recovery for businesses? We think about this as a realization phase. This happened in early March. That reality phase when retail by and large was closed across the country. We are now in a restart phase in an aggregate. We will emerge back into a recovery phase and then finally in reemergence. By and large, cycling had kind of got a head start in terms of the recovery for retail because we were deemed as this essential business. So consumers could frequent the shop, consider purchases and that sort of stuff. But if you look at this next slide here, this really kind of shows the power of being stuck in that realization phase. Most specialty retailers that carry apparel and footwear are still closed or are starting to reemerge. But through the course of March, they were essentially being closed down, and that resulted in a 40% decline in sales year over year for athletic footwear, and 39% decline, according to our POS data, in activewear. That's a pretty dramatic impact. Outdoor sports equipment was down 13%. This is just for the month now. Team sports equipment down 25%. Cycling increased almost 40% in the course of the month. And this is across the total market, not just IBD. Snow sports and equipment went down 45% in March, largely due to store closures, but also due to the fact that ski resorts were closed. And the real kind of surprising winner in all of this was health and fitness equipment, up 129%. So while cycling had the benefit of being deemed as essential business and people could potentially buy a bike through brick and mortar, the health and fitness equipment surge happened in absence of that brick and mortar support. So consumers really went out of their way to buy this equipment. And this is going to be a key theme, I think, for where we go moving forward. So some notes about what we're seeing in terms of macro trends that are impacting COVID or we're seeing through COVID. So you'll notice here, this is some data from HPS Civic Science Economic Sentiment Index through May. And you can see really the drop in numbers right around 4.1. So consumer sentiment really tanked out. And you can see that light blue line is really the sentiment or the confidence that consumers believe that they can find a new job in this economy. As we really think about what the future holds, this is probably one of those numbers that gives me the most concern. While we're seeing some rebound in many, many categories right now in the last few weeks, the fact that we have such a high unemployment rate and that the confidence level of consumers to find new jobs is low may really kind of hold the economy back and retail back. And I think that's just a reality we have to wrestle with. In terms of other indicators that we should be thinking about, the expense that consumers and business travelers were making really bottomed out in the fourth week of March, and it's down almost 162% week over week. And you can see the weekend number of on 5/3 was down 162%. This is data from our NPD Innovation Lab that uses a variety of sources to track industries outside of the POS space. John, it sounded like you had a question.
So I've got a question here for you, Dirk, relative to this eroding of travel. We're coming into summer. We're coming into summer vacation season, and I know we're all thinking that's probably not going to happen. I don't see it happening for me. What do you think that means for the IBD? What do you think that means for the cycling industry?
Well, I think if you really took a deep dive into, and we'll do this in a moment, which categories are growing and which ones really struggled, I think this both, if people do stay at home or stay in their neighborhoods or are unavailable for travel, I do sense that people are going to gravitate towards activities that are local to home, whether that, quite honestly, it's something like grilling or throwing a tent up in somebody's backyard or going out for a ride around the neighborhood. And I'm not talking performance road rides. I'm talking family rides on cruisers and transit fitness bicycles. Those are the types of activities I think that consumers may look to in the very near future if their travel plans do get kind of nixed. Moving on, another key kind of indicator that I've been watching is the spend on sports clubs. So this is the amount of revenue or dollars, transactional dollars that we're seeing spent at sports clubs. This is down 93%. And you can see that the trend line from March 1st, first week of March, to the end of April is really just kind of going down. And there's no indication of lift or a little bump. So again, my thinking here is, consumers that were used to going to health clubs, gyms, and so forth are going to be looking for healthy alternatives.
Yeah, I've got a question here too, Dirk, if I can interject. So, sure. So to your point, these health clubs are closed, and there's literally no sign when they're going to open back up again. I moonlight as a spinning instructor, and I've been getting notifications like crazy, basically just saying we don't know. And when and when they do open, that experience is not going to be the same as it ever was before, and I think that's a long time coming. They're looking to go online with a lot of classes and those sorts of things. Do you have any thoughts about how a retailer can capitalize on what I feel is kind of depressing news?
I actually think that that's one of the key themes that I want to hit on towards the end of this presentation. Why don't I hold my thoughts on that towards the end of the presentation?
Okay. Sure.
So I'm going to quickly kind of move through this, but this is a high-level kind of indication of where retail is going or has been going through the COVID crisis. The black line that you see towards the center at 100 is an index. So this is what, receipts, basically the amount of receipts that we were collecting or seeing being collected at retail look like. So you can see an aggregate in the weeks 3/7 and 3/14, actual receipts increased. And this was as consumers were buying things at mass retail, trying to kind of stock up for being sheltered at home. And you can see it stayed below that, in aggregate, stayed below that total since then. But what I think is more interesting is the emergence of online. And one of my coworkers, if you see the right graph, online went from 100% index and has continuously grown, so that it's about 37% higher in terms of receipts that we are now seeing obtained through online transactions. One of my coworkers says that, and I believe this, that the COVID crisis has basically emerged e-commerce further in 1 month than would have happened under normal circumstances in 3 years. I think the takeaway for the independent bicycle dealer is, what are you going to do to make sure that your shop is e-commerce enabled, that you have strong relationships with manufacturers and distribution centers and so forth, to assure your kind of ongoing ability to operate regardless of the status of your door being open or closed.
So do you believe that it could be online?
I'm sorry.
It could be permanent? Do you believe that shift toward online could be somewhat permanent?
I think, yeah, John, I do think the shift is permanent, but I don't think it is going to be as dramatic as this. And the reason I say that is, particularly in specialty retail, the need for servicing and support is going to drive floor traffic. People do need to try things on and so forth. So, will it stay like this? No. That's my expectation. But do I believe it's going to look more like this than it did pre-COVID? Absolutely. So I'm going to skip this slide over this slide just for sake of time, because we are running a bit long, and kind of move along. So this is important. What we can now monitor with our checkout tracking data is the index levels for each and every state, DMA, and region in the country. We'll continuously update you, and I'm sure John can send out slides as different regions of the country start to open up. In terms of what does this mean for cycling and the IBD, the March results were really, really astounding. So in the IBD grew 23% to $353 million. Bike sales really grew $58 million. It's a 35% increase from the year prior. Helmet, shoes, and gloves actually in aggregate declined as consumers really couldn't try on that product. So going back to, why do I think that, brick and mortar will play a valuable role and continue to play a valuable role in terms of the transactions that we get? It's because consumers do need to see things, touch things, buy things. And I don't think cycling is accepted from that. As a matter of fact, I believe, this is a personal belief, that the need for IBD to help consumers pick the right bike, the right size, along with the right accessory, footwear, and helmet choices is going to maintain the IBD's place in retail, especially in cycling. Moreover, the servicing piece is really going to kind of maintain that anchor. Nonetheless, as we've emerged through COVID, one thing I do want to recommend that we learn is, what do we do about e-commerce? So IBD bikes. Again, I think here's the big kind of the winners here were bicycles and categories that sold between $500 and $1,000. And, you know, our retail team can run price bands for you, but Transit Fitness had the absolute biggest dollar gain at $20 million or 67%, but Lifestyle actually grew the highest in terms of percentage to 90%. Electric bikes continued their trending. Only Road really didn't show a lot of out-and-out improvement during the COVID crisis. And a lot of that has to do with, or in the month of March, a lot of that has to do with the fact that consumers were really driving toward, you know, the performance categories where people had bikes are willing to ride those bikes for a few more months. But the categories in which consumers probably don't have a bike were the ones that really succeeded and won here. In terms of other key categories to talk about, I mentioned this: helmets, footwear, pedals, all down during the COVID crisis, largely based on the lack of availability or lack of ability to try and buy. So that, I think, is really kind of a good testimony to the power of the IBD in terms of driving these categories. In aggregate, another takeaway I'll give you is that categories like locks, lights, fenders, those categories that are commuter related did not do well. So that kind of points to the fact that people were buying bicycles and riding them around their neighborhood. They weren't riding them to a destination where they might have had to lock the bike up. The other thing I'll call out is trainers and rollers grew 190%. And this points to one of the key three themes that I'm going to talk about here in a moment as opportunities for growth. So emerging opportunities.
With some of this accessory, you know, some of these challenge categories and accessories, do you feel like maybe there could be an opportunity here for new merchandising strategies or maybe new service models in the IBD? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I do think, you know, the independent bicycle dealer is going to have to think a little bit about, and many retailers are doing this, right? Like, how do you assure the safety of the consumer that ships, you know, is on your floor? We've seen examples outside of the independent bicycle dealer of signage and rolling videos and so forth to assure consumers that the stores are cleaned every night to a high level. Taking those types of actions, and I think pragmatically and realistically, how do you give safe opportunities for consumers to try and buy items is going to be something you're going to need to think through. So with the last couple of minutes, I really do want to, you know, be mindful of everybody's time. I know we've gone over a few minutes here. There are three emerging opportunities that I want to kind of blast through and then close things up. So first, reinventing recess. Most parents really that got shuttered at home were dealing with kids that were also sent home and had to homeschool. Parents are really being forced to invent options for activities at home. Kids' bikes seem to be a really perfect and thriving opportunity here. Additionally, that add-on sale for a bike for the parents is strong. And then finally, I would really recommend thinking about digital outreach to your consumers. Who are your customers? How can you support them to help them learn to ride, learn to maintenance their bicycles, support that activity? Because there's a strong indication from all of these new purchases of those bikes between $500 to $1,000 that we have a lot of customers coming back to cycling. So how do we support them? You know, one little thing that I found the other day was fitness clubs are using digital media 15 times more than they were a year ago just to reach out to their customers. Second, vector into value. So we're going to send this deck out to you, or you can ask it of us, which I'll recommend that you do towards the end of this, and really look at the price bands that are growing in each category and create your merchandising strategy around this. I do think you're going to have to be mindful as an economy emerges around that slow emergence or reemergence, at least right now, and confidence around getting jobs and the unemployment rate. So be thoughtful about those price bands that are driving the surge that we saw in March, and see how we can kind of emulate that moving forward. Third, I think this is a really interesting takeaway. I was reading some articles yesterday in Politico and New York Post. New Yorkers are the most optimistic about using transit, and this is a poll that was done just a couple weeks ago, but they still state that 47% will avoid transit entirely after the COVID crisis. This is an astonishing number. What it really points to me is that if you've got a shop in an urban center, consumers are going to have to be looking for alternatives, or they will start having desires to look for alternatives to public transportation. And this is a really strong opportunity, I think, for growth, again, for those commuter style bikes, or those bikes that are really commuter friendly. Third, health at home. As I mentioned earlier, the category of home fitness in our data grew $459 million. That's a nearly 130% growth. We also know, looking in our data, that stationary bikes across the total market grew $51 million. It's a 171% increase since last year, and 49% or 49 million of that is coming outside of the IBD. So stationary bikes might be an emerging new category for the independent bicycle dealer, along with trainers that we did see grow in the IBD. I can tell you that, looking at rest of market data, that the rest of market actually outperformed IBD in terms of percentage growth on trainers. So three areas I want you to think about. Even in home fitness, can you bring in small training aids, yoga mats, those types of things that might be able to complement your business. And then and here's our kind of final slide today. This is who we are. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and just make the ask for John, because we're short on time. If you need help and you are a retailer that is reporting to us, feel free to call John. Email John. He's at johngraff.com, jon.graff@npd.com, and he can help you. If you're a new retailer, I really would encourage you, or a retailer that is not reporting to NPD and getting our regular reporting, please also reach out to John. John, jon.graff, Graff, at npd.com, and see how you can join our panel. It's a really, really great service. It has no charges involved. It's just a barter arrangement where we collect your data, and in exchange you get support and reporting from our company. And I really, really thank you for your time. John, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you to answer any final questions or make any final closing statements.
That sounds great, Dirk. We appreciate your time, and I as well appreciate the time of everyone who attended this webinar. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me for any questions, follow-up items, issues that you may need some response to. Again, you've got my email address, jon.graff@npd.com, and we will speak to you again at the next webinar coming up next season. Have a great day, all.